Studio 54 was Sodom and Gomorrah with a disco beat. A place where celebrities and civilians alike reveled in unrestrained debauchery.
Everything was going on in full swing. Drag, sex, and rock and roll in every single angle.
In the next 2 hours, we're going to give you an uncensored look at America's most outrageous nightclub.
Studio 54 obliterated it was the Titanic of nightclubs.
We'll examine the 3 years from April 1977 to February 1980 that Studio 54 reigned supreme. It was a club ruled by two wildly different men, the gregarious Steve Rubell and the reticent Ian Schrager. A club that was a hangout for Andy Warhol, Bianca Jagger, Halston, Calvin Klein, and Liza Minnelli. We'll cover the Studio 54 phenomenon from opening night.
It was brilliant. Best night ever in New York nightclub history.
To closing night.
Just before they went to jail, they had a really big bash. And Steve kept playing I Did It My Way over and over again.
From the front door.
The people at the door were casting directors. And if you came there and they wanted two of a kind and you were the third, you did not get in. You know, it's like that part's already been taken, lady, sorry.
To the dance floor.
I would dance at the drop of a hat. I'd be out there for hours smoking a cigarette.
We'll examine how the owners, Schrager and Rubell, fell victim to their success and brought their club down with them.
All this money actually got stuffed into plastic garbage bags, which sometimes they would hide in the rafters of the basement.
And co-owner Ian Schrager talks about the devastating experience. We'll take you to a different time, a different era, where sex was as close as the nearest bathroom and drugs were handed out like party favors. This amazing story of the rise and fall of Studio 54 will be told through archival photos, never-before-seen film footage, reenactments, and interviews with former Studio 54 employees, club regulars, and celebrities like disco diva Gloria Gaynor, actress Lorna Luft, Village People David Hodo and Philippe Rose, and singers Mary Seymour and Rick James.
Visualize Caligula in the height of Rome and had Caligula throwing a party. That's Studio 54. That's it.
By the mid-70s, New York nightlife was awakening from a decade-long slumber. The Vietnam War was over. Watergate was no longer front-page news, and the sexual revolution was in full swing. Author of The Club, Stephen Gaines.
There was lots of things going on in the city. There were swingers clubs, sex clubs, bathhouses for gays, bars, prostitution on the corners.
And a new sound in the nightclubs, disco. Songwriter Bruce Roberts.
It was a very, very joyous kind of music. It was happy. It was really straight ahead, four on the floor kind of music, where the kick drum was the most important thing.
Disco diva Gloria Gaynor.
It really kind of taught people to dance because it made the beat so prominent. The bass and the drums were so prominent in these songs that it inspired you to dance. It really inspired you to stay on beat.
Disco was for everybody. It was an extension of the society. It was a time where people could forget their 9-to-5 troubles and go out and have a blast.
Disco clubs sprouted up all over Manhattan and the surrounding boroughs. Richie Notar worked the club circuit.
That was the time of Saturday Night Fever and you know, Brooklyn and all these places in Queens were trying to be like the movie, and you had all the Tony Maneros and such.
One club was different. In 1975, Enchanted Garden was opened by two young entrepreneurs, 31-year-old Steve Rubell from Brooklyn and the 29-year-old Bronx-born Ian Schrager. Schrager was a real estate lawyer. Rubell owned a chain of restaurants. They met while attending Syracuse University. They were a study in contradiction. Party promoter Carmen D'Alessio.
Steve was the outgoing person and the social one, and that Ian was the serious one and the tough guy, the bad guy.
Ian Schrager was one of the handsomest guys I had ever seen. Steve was crazy about him. It was a little bit of a problem because Ian Schrager is heterosexual and Steve wasn't.
Despite their differences, the two came from similar backgrounds. Club impresario Jim Farrat.
The world that Steve and Ian came out of with Calvin and Barry and Donna, Karen and all those people, it was always like, my bar mitzvah is going to be better than your bar mitzvah. I mean, really, this was like a big thing in New York's Jewish circles. So they'd always come from that thing, I'll show you, I'll show you.
While the Enchanted Garden was wildly successful, people from the city ignored it.
I wrote about Enchanted Gardens in my column, and it brought a lot of people to that club, but nobody from Manhattan went out to Douglaston, Queens to go to a discotheque.
I didn't go there, and I didn't work there, and I wouldn't be seen there. What can I tell you? It was in Queens.
Schrager and Rubel turned their ambitious eyes toward Manhattan. The first thing they needed was a space. Party promoter Carmen D'Alessio showed them a cavernous, aging theater at 254 West 54th Street.
Of course, they fell in love with it, but they were wondering if it wasn't too ambitious and how was this going to become a reality.
Built in 1927, the theater had a history of turning fantasy into reality. Over the years, it had showcased everything from opera to dinner theater. Then, in 1943, CBS moved in. The company used the building's entrance on 53rd Street and referred to the facility as Studio 53. Shows like The $64,000 Question and Captain Kangaroo were produced in the old theater. In the mid-70s, CBS stopped using the space for television production. Author Anthony Hayden Guest.
CBS had gone out to the coast, but they still kept this place running. It was still fully equipped. And so that basically this place was up and running and ready.
Rubel and Schrager had their own plans for the old theater. They'd turn it into a discotheque and call it Studio 54. Club owner Arthur Weinstein.
Steve took me over there, I'll never forget. And he was nervous. He was nervous because it was a very large space. No one had ever attempted anything that big. And he, you know, he was confident, but he was scared.
To execute a complete facelift, Schrager and Rubel hired architect Scott Bromley.
I walked in and I said, I got this idea. Let's turn the stage into the dance floor. Everybody wants to be on stage, you know, that's the key to life in Manhattan or any place else.
As 1976 drew to an end, renovation on the building began. Owner Ian Schrager.
When you're in the nightclub business, you really have no discernible product. You have nothing different from everybody else has. The same liquor, the same music. So all you have, the only opportunity for distinction is the magic you create.
He didn't want the Bagel Nosh crowd, which meant Jewish-looking people. He didn't want bridge and tunnel people.
The reference bridge and tunnel people meant residents of the surrounding boroughs. Anthony Hayden Guest.
Manhattanites, of course, are notoriously kind of mean about people that have the misfortune from living in parts of New York that are not Manhattan. And they call them bridge and tunnel because that is, of course, the ways that one comes into Manhattan.
He didn't want Kiana from the Americana. Kiana was the name of a fabric that was very popular with South Americans for evening wear, and they always stayed at the Americana Hotel.
What Rubel wanted was a club filled with fabulous people.
I had my own mailing list. Andy Warhol contributed with his own mailing list for the project. Francesco Scavulo, Calvin Klein. There was a group called the Islanders, who was a very compact group of gay people that used to go to Fire Island, very lively, very energetic. They had a list of about 3,000 names.
The event created quite a buzz in social circles, despite a vote of no confidence from the press.
The Daily News ran a little dismissive little subhead saying, Studio 54, where are you? Which was kind of poking fun of it, meaning, oh, here's another disco, just what New York doesn't need.
Opening night was April 26, 1977. Former busboy Richie Notar.
1 hour before we were opening, maybe 45 minutes, they were still putting down the black AstroTurf on the floor, so it was very hectic.
Brian Thompson, the lighting designer, and I were just kind of focusing the lights and making it really sharp looking and smart. And the lights went out on the bar. So we run out to the local bodega and get all of these like religious candles. By now the back door was jammed. We can't get by this gorgeous babe and her like, you know, muscle-bound 9-foot-tall boyfriend, right? So Bromley to the rescue. I picked the babe up and I just move her over like this, right? Well, he's just about to slug me and I catch his arm and I said, you slug me, you don't get in, because if I don't get in, you don't get in. I'm the architect here.
The scene was much the same at the front door. Former doorman Mark Beneke.
We walked out the door and there was this mass of people standing outside clamoring to get in.
The feeling and energy in that opening of Studio 54 was almost scary. There were so many people there. We really weren't quite used to that. I mean, some people left, they were so alarmed.
So it was like the biggest moment in history for nightlife.
Despite last-minute jitters and less than positive press coverage, Studio 54 opened on April 26, 1977. Owners Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager had a hit on their hands. Little did they know, they had created a monster. 34-year-old Rubell and 31-year-old Schrager had owned and operated other night spots. They knew how to open a club. But nothing could prepare them for the response they received that first night. The stars were out in full force, from Cher to models Margot Hemingway and Brooke Shields, to Donald and Ivana Trump.
And when we opened, it was just like, whoosh. It was out of control the first night. There was no organization. I mean, it was just one big party. And, we wound up, having more fun probably than the people.
Fun was the operative word. From the moment you entered Studio 54, the stage was set for self-indulgence. Night scene columnist Michael Musto.
Disco was already quite prevalent, but Studio was the ultimate disco. It wasn't just another new club opening. It was a place where you really felt like you had walked into some kind of magical kingdom.
First thing you came through was some smoked glass doors and to a hallway where the man stood there with this big smile on his face and said $15. You paid the $15, walked a few more feet to another set of black smoked glass doors where the man took your ticket.
Former party promoter Nikki Haskell.
Well, there's a long entranceway that was mirrored on both sides and had a big, huge chandelier in it.
Architect Scott Bromley.
A chandelier in the middle, hit by laser that bounced light all around, and mirrors all around that caught the laser light and just bounced it all around the top of the ceiling.
From there, the non-stop disco beat lured you into the club's cavernous hall of hedonism.
You could see all this lights pulsating in the main room and feel this energy coming down. So you were just sucked right down this tunnel, right into the main room.
Once inside the main room, you were greeted by an enormous refreshment area.
The main bar was a square bar with a tiered top to it and had waterfall and glass block in the middle.
On your way from the main bar to the dance floor, there were some couches and banquettes, and people would kind of hang out and lounge in between dancing.
From the main bar area and the banquettes, you walked up to this pulsating, throbbing monster of a dance floor with all this activity going on.
They had these fabulous lights that would come down, and they go all the way down to just about eye level, and then they twirl around like on cop cars.
Club promoter Jim Farad.
I remember Steve once saying, when people walk in the room, their jaws are going to drop, and that's what all this is about, is that first moment when they go, oh my God.
The dance floor was the heart of Studio 54, and disco music, the heartbeat. Mary Seymour, singer with the band Musique.
It was the music. Back in the day, when the music hit, people just got up there and danced.
It accelerated your heart to such a beat that you just could not escape it. I mean, the music overpowered you.
Everybody was coming on to everybody, dancing together, writhing. It was very sexual.
Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Do you like it? Do you like it like this? Push, push, in the bush. Push, push, in the bush.
And a number of them was sexy. Some of them had double entendres, and your mind goes where you let it.
The atmosphere Rubell and Schrager created was a mix of elegance and high tech. Studio patron Richard DuPont.
When I walked in, I remember this little voice said, "Richard, you're never going to see anything like this in your life again."
Rubell's assistant, Myra Shear.
It was the space, it was Ian, and it was Steve. And all three were essential. It was like, a three-legged stool. Somehow, between the three, there was a magic that could not be without the three.
Scott Taylor tended bar at the club.
Sophisticated women, men in tuxedos, and older people with like gray hair. And there was this sophisticated vibe going on.
That vibe was helped along by the opening night entertainment, an eclectic mix of fashion show, circus acts, and a performance by the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. The crowd loved it. The press reported it. And the owners ran with it. Ian Schrager.
I'm seeing a picture of Cher on the front page of the New York Post in a straw hat and a pair of jeans and a T-shirt.
But Studio 54's triumphant inaugural did not guarantee immediate ascendancy to the top of the nightclub heap. Studio doorman Mark Beneke.
The next couple of nights or 3 nights, whatever, it wasn't really as busy or that busy.
And then Steve Rubell got a call from fashion designer Halston. Writer Stephen Gaines.
On Monday night, I'm giving a birthday party for Bianca Jagger for about 30 people, and I think I'll take them all here. And Steve Rubell said, oh, I'm sorry, we're closed on Monday night. So Halston said, closed? He said, well, then open it.
Bianca's birthday soiree launched a tradition of outrageous theme parties.
We popped out of her cake. I wore a diaper, which, I swallowed my pride a lot in this place, but it was, all for the good of fun.
Nightlife aficionado Anthony Hayden Guest.
Ian Schrager sent out for the famous White Horse, and it's led in by a couple of near-naked people, and Bianca Jagger, who can certainly spot a photo opportunity when she sees one, jumps aboard, and the photograph is taken. The photograph is published on front pages all around the world.
The international publicity about Studio 54 sealed the deal. Rubell and Schrager ruled Clubland.
All the forces of the universe came together at the same time, and it was all for Steve and I to do, but to just hold on.
Film producer Howard Rosenman.
Steve had the kind of vision and the kind of big picture of it all, and then Ian followed it through because Ian had the wherewithal, the knowledge, and the financial muscle.
Party promoter Carmen D'Alessio.
Steve, being so charismatic, is the one that is remembered as the legend behind the studio. But Ian was always like so much in the background that you can see him as the brains, and the technician behind the whole thing.
One of their brilliant innovations was the front door policy.
That hat, don't never come here with the hat.
People couldn't assume they'd get inside just by showing up at the club. Only chosen guests were allowed to enter. Actress Lorna Luft.
No one had ever created a place that said you can come in and you can't. They knew the more that you tell someone you can't have that, the more they want it.
He called it tossing a salad. He would always say, let the limo drivers in, for instance. He liked limo drivers. He liked a bunch of preppy-looking people, but they're not too many.
So we had the kid who worked at McDonald's next to, some movie star, some superstar model. People who added something to what was happening inside, whether they would dress in a festive way or they were interesting, high energy, danced well, whatever, or of course if they were, socialites, celebrities, models. You had to add something. You had to bring something to the table, let's put it that way.
There were a lot of the gay culture. And then that's men and women and friends of gay people that like to dance, like to dress up, like to party. That was the real, mainstay of who was at Studio 54. They were beautiful, and celebrities and people of power like to look at beautiful people.
Many of the chosen were European.
They were elegant and rich and sophisticated and came anywhere they were invited. So we called them the Eurotrash.
They like to spend a lot in champagne, Cristal, Dom Perignon. They're the ideal clients, They look good, they dress well, and they spend money.
Studio 54's popularity soared, despite its less than desirable location. Partier Justin Davis.
The only thing that was around there was porno theaters. So you got this whole elite crowd going to the worst neighborhood in Manhattan to go dancing and prancing.
That crowd was catered to by a carefully selected staff. Former bartender Alex MacArthur.
We were encouraged to be cocky. They let us drink behind the bar. It was the 70s, so there was a lot of drugs, and we were encouraged to just party and have a good time, but work as fast as you could.
They were as flamboyant and outlandish as you could possibly be, but that made the bars work.
You'd have like the blonde guy, the dark guy, and different personalities. And I know Steve set it up that way, so that there was somebody for everybody that came into the club.
Movie producer Alan Carr.
To be a waiter or a busboy at Studio 54 with those little shorts, there was a lot of negotiating going on.
The combination of the staff, the space, and the clientele kept Studio on top, and its success signaled the demise of other night spots. Arthur Weinstein owned the club called Hurrah.
When they opened, I knew, because I went to the opening, that, hey, it's over. I mean, forget about it.
But the club that had everything going for it also had an Achilles heel.
You get the place open and then you handle the laws, you handle the technicalities when they arise.
The technicality in this case was a liquor license.
He applied for a catering license on a night-by-night basis. So each night he was able to serve alcohol, and then the next day he had to reapply for one. That, of course, was illegal.
The New York State Liquor Authority made a surprise appearance. With them were cops from the local precinct. Scott Taylor was tending bar.
All these police come in, and thought it was customers dressed as police. And then the next thing you know, they arrested one of the bartenders, and the music went off. And that was it. They chased everybody out.
Lynn Barkley was there.
As I talked to Steve and Ian through the gates, I said, why don't you just open it up as a juice bar, just let people go in and dance. There's no law against people dancing. You just let them in. I went back and let thousands of people back into the door, just said, come on in and party, turned up the music, and from that moment on, we became a juice bar.
This obviously helped them in profits, but it didn't stop people going there. I mean, people weren't going just to hang out at the bar and get a whiskey and soda, you know. They were going to dance, they were going to do all kinds of other stuff, you know. I doubt if alcohol was high on their list of priorities.
It was the day of the goodies too, if I may add, and if I might be honest.
The goodies, in this case, were drugs. Cocaine for the most part.
So they were having fun, even if they were not drinking as much.
Within 24 hours of opening its doors, Studio 54 was the place to make the scene in 1977. Within 1 month, the club was almost closed down. Promoter Carmen D'Alessio recalls Steve Rubell's solution.
We would be serving juices, but then they would be carrying their little bottles. You know, he would tell them to bring their bottles and to mix it inside. So the party would still go on and we would still be having a good time regardless, you know.
Former bartender Scott Taylor.
You don't go to the place for the liquor, you go because of the vibe and the excitement, and the vibe and the excitement was there even better than before.
Nightclub owner Arthur Weinstein.
Of course, there was a glimmer of hope. Hey, they lost their liquor license? Oh, that's terrible. They went anyway. They would rather go there with no booze.
The lack of booze did little to stop the hordes of people clamoring to get into the club. Columnist Michael Musto.
The scene outside the door was both glamorous and desperate. Everybody in New York wanted to get into this place, and some of them just couldn't, no matter how hard they tried.
Gaining entry to Studio 54 meant passing owner Steve Rubell's nightly litmus test. Studio regular Nikki Haskell.
You can come in and you can't come in, and we don't let anybody in here with hats on, and didn't I tell you not to wear an outfit that looked like that the last time, and don't come in. And it was like a dictator. It was like a disco dictator.
Just watching him, you know, do his thing was probably better than going to the movies or going to some bullshit club somewhere or going home. So that's the only way I can explain it. He was like, you know, Little Caesar out there.
Rubell was exact about his mission. One night, studio bartender Alex MacArthur showed up with guests from out of town.
And I had these friends in tow, and I got to the front, and Steve Rubell's there, and he's like, Alex! And then he looks and his face drops, and he goes, no way, no way. He goes, Alex, no way. And then he grabs me, he goes, come over here. And he gets me aside, and he goes, don't you ever do this to me again.
Writer Stephen Gaines.
He called it his nightly party, and the people that he allowed in were going to be guests at his party, and he wanted a very special mixture.
The recipe for that mix was handed down to 19-year-old Mark Beneke, the club's official doorman.
The most important thing with mixing the crowd, people that went inside, was the energy level that someone, you know, gave off at the door. You could generally tell by how someone came to the door, or how, what they said, how they spoke, how they were going to act inside, and whether they were going to contribute to the overall, interesting theatricality that went on inside.
Actress Jade Barrymore, mother of Drew Barrymore, describes the scene outside the club.
People were waiting in lines with the most fantastic costumes on, each one trying to outdo the other one so that they could be pointed to. It's like, you, so they could get in.
The cab pulled up and this woman got out, and she was all done up with like green and purple hair, and she was in a rubber suit, and she was dragging 2 plastic dogs on a leash behind her, and she got right in the door.
A friend of mine and I stood outside in these quilted kimonos, which we had bought to great expense, and we just were so sure that Mark was going to go, yo, you two over there. Here's free drinks, free admission, you rule. And he didn't even notice us. We just stood there in these quilted, wilting kimonos for hours and hours, and it was the most depressing night of my life.
The spell Studio 54 cast often made people forget their manners.
And if you came with someone, and they would let you in, and sometimes they wouldn't let your date in. You go, bye-bye, see you later.
It was a true narcotic. Once you went there, you had to go back. You were desperate to go back. Because no matter how bad you felt about yourself outside, no matter how filled with self-loathing you were on the other side of the velvet ropes, once you got into this magic club, you felt glamorous and beautiful and young and exciting.
Because suddenly, you were part of the Corps d'Elite. Movie producer Lester Persky.
Every night, some of the most famous people, who had better things to do, you couldn't get them to go to an opening of a play, but they'd go to an opening of the opening of a bottle of champagne at the studio.
Party maven Justin Davis.
There were those moments when you look on a sofa right in front of the dance floor, and you do have Elizabeth Taylor with Andy Warhol, with Betty Ford, with Halston, and all of them doing this thing, and you think you're watching a movie.
Celebrities were commonplace at Studio 54, but every now and then, one of them stood out.
Catherine Deneuve walked up to the bar, and she walked right up to me. And I'd seen a lot of beautiful women in my day, but let me tell you, she took the cake. And she just smiled at me and told me what she wanted, and I handed her the drink, and she just rubbed her hand over my wrist. And they're all laughing at me.
Upstaging the celebrities were drag queens who lit up the night. Producer Howard Rosenman.
They were such exotic creatures, and they were really, really beautiful. They spent their days getting themselves together to come to the studio. You know, so they would steal their dresses and do their thing during the day, and they were so outrageously beautiful.
Many of the drag queens passed for women, much to the confusion of some patrons. Nikki Haskell recalls an incident with prize fighter Jerry Cooney.
We were standing at the bar, and this big drag queen put the move on him. And she was like eyeball to eyeball with him, and he's about 6'4". So my first instinct was to say, you know, this is a guy, this is a drag queen. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to mind my own business. So I walked around, I went over to the dance floor, and I was dancing around. I was sort of, you know, eyeing them out of the corner of my eye. And about halfway through one of my dances, Jerry came over to me and says, I have to ask you a question. I said, yes. He said, that's a guy? That's a guy?
Cheryl Rickson Davis was the 1980 Penthouse Pet of the Year.
Everybody thought everyone was a drag queen, too, because the drag queens were it. I mean, they were the princesses of studio.
The mix of characters was right out of Central Casting. Architect Scott Bromley.
We had people like Disco Sally, she must have been 75 years old, with wrinkled knees and everything, and practically no clothes on, be dancing with, you know, some leather trucker guy, you know.
She looked like Grandma out the Playboy magazine. They used to pick her up and pass her around the crowd. And I used to sit there in total amazement. And she'd be out there.
And you had Rollerina, who was always allowed in. You know, who was this, I think Rollerina was a lawyer, who would dress in this wedding dress and roll in.
There was a couple who would come in and she would, basically she's naked. And her husband kind of looked like, dressed like Abraham Lincoln, and he'd kind of follow her around with a flashlight pointing it on certain parts of her body.
The dress code was never officially clothing optional, but for some club goers it may well have been. Promoter Lynn Barkley remembers one particularly underdressed guest.
She wore like a 1950s little see-through spaghetti strap thing with fur all the way around it, and completely nude underneath it, except she took and pierced both her nipples and had the chain going across here. In real life, she was a substitute teacher on Long Island.
Former waiter T.J. Walsh.
And then there was Maid Marian, a naked bride that would come in with her husband, and she'd have absolutely nothing on sometimes. And sometimes she would have leather straps or a wedding veil, and that would be it.
Philippe Rose, the Native American in the disco group The Village People.
I saw a couple of girls for one Halloween, just nothing but high heel shoes on and wrapped in cellophane.
Rubel and Schrager threw Halloween parties that were notorious for their bacchanalian splendor.
Halloween at Studio 54 was you cannot believe it made Halloween on Santa Monica Boulevard look sort of sober, okay? And that's pretty wild.
There were people that looked like they were sawn in half and running around, blood everywhere, and it was all just illusion.
They had like vignettes, and you'd be walking by and like a ghost would come out at you. And then you'd walk around the other thing and there'd be somebody in a suit with a hatchet coming down at you. And there'd be snakes running around in different little, boxes and things. I mean, they really decorated it like a funhouse.
And it would just get ripped down. The next night it was like it never happened. But that's what was just so amazing. And people were very dedicated and very into it.
In January 1978, Steve and Ian threw a grand event for famed fashion photographer Francesco Scavullo.
They had photography booths all around, and they had drag queens posing as Cosmo covers in all the booths when I came in. It was a surprise birthday party.
Studio's theme parties were mini extravaganzas, staged for one night and then dismantled.
They put a lot of money and a lot of inventiveness in it. They would put tens and tens and twenties of thousands of dollars into setting up these things.
You can walk in, it would be like you're in the castle of Louis XIV, or you can walk in and it would be Disneyland.
Those were the greatest nights ever in party history in New York, because they went all out, Steve and Ian and Carmen, to really entertain you.
I remember a big party for Dolly Parton for whatever reason, and Steve went all out for that. They had haystacks and horses and donkeys and mules running through the club.
You thought you were in a farm. I mean, you thought you were 150 miles outside of New York City when you walked in. I mean, those are the kind of things that you don't see anymore, Or if you do see it, it's on a back lot in a Hollywood studio. You don't see it going just to a nightclub.
Playing the role of consummate host was Steve Rubel. But while Rubel basked in the limelight, co-owner Ian Schrager was the man orchestrating these fetes. Bartender Scott Taylor.
They would do these big production things there. Ian was the one who would do all that. He'd expedite everything. He would do the rehearsals. He'd do all the checking. He'd make sure everything was... Ian make sure everything ran like a... He's good.
Assistant Myra Shear.
The goal was to delight. And that was what Ian could do. He could surprise you. He could create an entirely different environment for the evening. So it was like being cast in a movie for the night.
Like a movie, Studio thrived on publicity, and Rubel knew how to work it. Busboy Richie Notar.
Bianca would say, "Steve, I told you I didn't want my picture taken." Like, "Bianca, I don't know how the photographers got in. I'm sorry, I'll kick them out now." Meanwhile, he invited them. He was very shrewd that way. So he did good for the club, and he did good for his clientele.
Rubel and Schrager treated the press right, and the press, in turn, protected the club.
People would just be writing, "Oh, another great night at Studio 54. Nobody was reporting it in great detail. And I think that's probably good, Why spoil it all?
The unreported activities between the dances gave the club its sizzle. In 1977, Studio 54 was the right club in the right place at the right time. There was just one hard and fast rule. Leave your inhibitions at the front door. The party never stopped at Studio 54, a phenomenon due in large part to the deliberately loose rules concerning drugs and sex. Model Janice Dickinson.
The taboo subject of drugs at Studio 54. Oh, I didn't do any. No, in those days everyone experimented.
Co-owner Steve Rubel did more than experiment. Studio patrons Richard and Robert DuPont.
Steve was, the king of the lewds. He would hand those Quaaludes out like drink tickets. He was always giving the drink tickets away and the lewds.
There was always free drugs and liquor. There was always free liquor and drugs. Yeah. Always.
Party promoter Mickey Haskell.
He'd be by the bar, drinking his Coke with about 10 straws in it. You could always see when he had a couple of Quaaludes, he would slightly foam at the mouth. It was a look.
Scene maker Jim Farrat.
One of the things that Quaaludes would do with people is that their memory would get lost. So he would be in the middle of a sentence and he would go, and he forgot where he was. Which was, only Steve Rubell could make that endearing.
Though Rubell enjoyed the numbing effect of Quaaludes, the drug of choice among clubgoers was cocaine. Bartender Alex MacArthur.
It was cool to do cocaine. And everybody was doing it, and it didn't matter how famous you were or what a peon you were. Everybody was doing the coke, and acceptable.
Writer Stephen Gaines.
You would see some stockbroker's wife, with a Gucci purse, and she'd pull a little vial out of it. It wasn't the least bit shocking.
At that time, people thought that cocaine made you smart and sexy and clever and witty.
Clubgoer Justin Davis.
The conversation in studios, you can do all the coke you want. It's not addictive. It was in the newspaper.
Cocaine was not cheap, but for the wealthy patrons of Studio 54, money was not an issue. Artist Richard Bernstein.
Sometimes you brought your own, sometimes you found them there. And sometimes you would find this very wealthy Persian prince, and he'd be happy to be in New York City and at the most exclusive club in the world, and he'd order bottles of champagne and then pass things around.
Club patron Cheryl Rickson Davis.
One night I saw somebody with a rolled up $100 bill snort a line and throw away the 100. And then somebody else grabs it and you think somebody's got the 100 and they use it again as a straw and throw it away again.
As prevalent as cocaine was, many celebrities pretended they didn't have any drugs. Singer Rick James.
They went to Studio 54 with no drugs and just expected, and it was unexpected, that they were going to get drugs. And usually they did. I mean, I used to be there, and everybody was running around. You got any coke? You got any coke? And I would say, mother, you worth $100 million. You ask me for some coke. Coke. You don't have any?
Trust me, celebrities had their own drugs. Trust me, they all had their own drugs. But let me tell you something. Celebrities, if they felt that they can get drugs for free from Steve Rubell, they made believe they didn't have drugs.
Not everyone was stingy with their stash.
And when I remember Halston taking out a vial of blow, and he saw some young thing, and he gave him a vial of blow, and the young kid didn't know what to do with it, and he went like that. And he put the whole vial in his thing. And then when I got it, I saw Halston, couldn't believe what he was watching. The kid just didn't know.
Susan Shapiro was a college student when she produced a documentary about the club.
One night I was on the payphone, making a phone call to the lab to find out how the film was, and this guy that I never met before came up to me and started laying lines, without even talking to me, just started laying lines of coke out on the payphone. And it was just the wildest thing.
I would get tipped by grams of coke. And so would all the other bartenders. We keep a bucket and we keep throwing vials in it and split them up at the end of the night,
At Studio 54, the partying didn't end until the sun came up.
How do you think you stayed up,
The powder in your nose. Powder your nose.
David Hodo, hard hat with the Village People.
You felt like a vampire when you would leave in the morning, like you'd been partying all night long in that light.
Why sleep? You were on coke. No, people just did coke. I mean, there were times, I remember staying up for 3 days and still going out to dance.
You can't work all day, stay up all night, and go to after-hours club and not have some sort of stimulant, You can't. I mean, it's not, no matter how young you are, it doesn't work that way. And that cocaine wasn't free.
The drugs and the drinking were powerful aphrodisiacs.
Between the cocktail of the music and being at the club and being high, and you would see somebody and, you'd become riveted to them.
Sex was inevitable, anywhere and everywhere in the club.
Behind the loudspeakers, you would open the office, somebody would be doing something inside the office. You would be walking upstairs and you would be stumbling through bodies, I mean, no matter what you imagine, it happened.
I think gay men gave heterosexual people permission to be promiscuous as well. And I think all of that is somehow wrapped up in the world of disco. as embodied by Studio 54.
A girl was leaning over the balcony, had her skirt hiked up, and the guy was behind her, and they were having sex while watching thousands dance below them.
The nosebleed section of the balcony was specially equipped for carnal pleasures.
At the very top, we cantilevered a section of the center out and upholstered in 12-inch round bolsters made out of vinyl or rubber.
The real reason why they covered the balcony in black rubber was because it was easier to wash down in the morning because there had been so much sex going on up there.
Sexual acts were not only prevalent, they were executed without fear of consequence.
You saw someone downstairs, you danced with them, you got hot, you went upstairs and you stripped your way out of, stripped the night away.
In the late 70s, although sexually transmitted diseases existed, many were easily treatable.
You couldn't catch anything that you couldn't cure with a shot. And that's, you know, that's what made it great. It didn't matter what you did, you could get cured the next day if you caught something.
You were safe to do whatever you wanted to do and be whoever you wanted to be. That was it was like this world that they created inside the club. So you had all kinds of people coming from every direction, from the business world, from the art world, from the entertainment world, from the music industry, executives and artists, all going, letting their hair down, shaking their butt, you know, and having a really good time, partying hard.
And if you were a celebrity in need of privacy, you headed to the VIP room in Studio's basement.
It was very grungy. It was just a basement with some seats. But it was there that celebrities and famous people like to hang with each other because they're comfortable that way, because they all have been through a certain thing together and they know that they're not going to be bothered and fawned on and hit upon in any way.
Steve Rubell once held an ejaculation contest in the basement among the bartenders, and the boy who ejaculated the furthest got invited to Barbados with him.
There were like little cubicles downstairs in the basement too, where there was mattresses on the floor. It was really, yeah. And there were mattresses. There were a lot, and like the busboys would be around with all like big people, like powerful men.
And happy clientele translated into big bucks for the club.
The cash registers at Studio 54 would fill up with so much cash that they would literally be overflowing and they couldn't shut the drawers. So they would empty out the drawers periodically every hour or two, but at the same time they would change the tape in the cash register and put a new one in and hide the earlier tape.
All the money didn't make it to the basement. Rubell's neighbor, Justin Davis.
He was taking tons of money home, because I've seen it in the house. He used to have a big Norma Kamali coat, and the whole lining of the coat was money and drugs. He would walk around with this big hideous thing, make believe he was freezing, and it was filled with cash. And that's how he would take it home.
Movie producer, Howard Rosenman.
You would walk into Steve's closet and there was money. Tons and tons of money. Hundreds and thousands of bills all over the place.
By 1978, the nightly party at Studio 54 was in full swing, catering to all predilections and addictions. Money was piling up, and like kids in a candy shop, the owners were stuffing the cash in their pockets. The most successful club in history paid a mere $8,000 in taxes for 1977. In reality, the club had grossed more than $3 million. Rubell and Schrager had taken upwards of $2 million off the top. On the streets, that's called skimming. Writer Anthony Hayden Guest.
The bar business and the restaurant business, they're cash businesses, and it's very much a given that there's some skimming.
On the club's one-year anniversary, April 26, 1978, Rubell and Schrager threw a huge celebration. Partier Richard DuPont.
It was like a circus. There were like giraffes and a marching band played Happy Birthday.
Every night was a circus at Studio 54.
The ladies' room was like the best because they had like little vanity mirrors and like all the beautiful stools, and you would sit there and do your little cocaine and whatever and talk to this one and that one and watch the beautiful girls put their makeup on.
A favorite hangout for celebs was the DJ booth. Jim Ferret.
All the celebrities would somehow make their way into that DJ booth, and you could see that DJ booth in any place in the room because of the way it was lit.
Songwriter Bruce Roberts.
I was there one night when Liza was there, and they would get on mic and introduce records, and it was just a big party.
Film producer Lester Persky remembers Steve Rubell gave certain patrons free rein.
So after a while, he would let Truman Capote, who was a favored guest of his and a friend of mine, would take over and be the disc jockey. Now, can you imagine Truman Capote peering over those records? He would tell the disc jockey what to play. Truman loved it. He gave him writing, I think, to become a disc jockey at Studio 54.
The disc jockeys at Studio 54 became celebrities in their own right.
And the star, of course, of the evening was the guy at the turntable. I mean, those DJs really did rule that room.
DJs were very, very important at that time. They would give the songs visibility. They would try them out. They would be the first people to try out records.
Singer Mary Seymour.
They were the force. They were the ones who chose the music and played it in clubs, okay? And to this day, they're a major force in the industry, and they always will be. They're the ears of the people.
Singer Gloria Gaynor counted on that force. When she wanted to promote the B-side of one of her releases, her managers called on studio DJ Richie Kozar for help.
They said, let's go down to Studio 54 and get Richie Kozar to play this record because this is a hit record. This is going to be a hit record. So he took it there. Richie loved it, and because of the clout that he had with the disc jockeys in the area, he got them all to play it, and it just spread like wildfire.
The song was I Will Survive. It became a huge hit, and the success of the record was attributed to the DJs at Studio 54. Music wasn't the only thing coming out of studio. Radio personality Rick Dees.
I was actually in Memphis, Tennessee at the time, and I would give reports on what went on the night before at Studio 54 because that was the pulse. It was the epicenter of the disco universe.
In July of 1978, Studio 54 hosted the premiere party for the movie Grease. The film's producer, Alan Carr.
He turned the whole club into a high school. You walked in, the entryway was nothing but lockers, high school lockers on both sides. And then you went into the main part of the club, and he had all these old convertible cars of the 50s.
And the fire department came, and they're ready to open in like 15 minutes, and they didn't drain the gas out of the tanks.
We had to take the gas out of the gas tanks and then, tow the cars in, pushing them.
Always trying to top themselves, in September of 1978, Steve and Ian redesigned the club. Studio assistant Myra Shear.
Ian saw the play Sweeney Todd, and it had a bridge in it, and that's where he got the idea to build this bridge. So people would be upstairs on the dance floor, and they would move across with the bridge.
Nikki Haskell hosted a television show in New York and often shot segments on the contraption.
And they would keep the bridge behind the scrim, and at a certain point in the evening they would open it up and it would come forward and you could get on it and you could dance on it.
The scrim, or curtain, could be raised and lowered for special parties.
But when they had certain parties, they dropped the screen, and behind the screen there was the private party.
Writer Stephen Gaines.
There were guards on either side. There was usually a private party going on. You could have any sort of a private party if you were a celebrity, and the drinks would be free back there.
Some nights, drinks were free throughout the entire club.
Every once in a while, Steve would get up in the booth and go, "The bar is open," and people would make a mad rush for the bar.
Any night at Studio 54, I would suggest to you, would have been more fabulous than any night that you've ever been in any other place in the world if you were a night animal.
At the front door, they would have like lollipops and candy for everybody, Tootsie Rolls. And that was, the end of studio, was leaving with a little piece of candy. It was sort of, it's sort of funny when you think about this nightclub. And then they treat you like a little child when you're going out the door.
Generous and genuine. By night, Steve Rubell ruled his clubhouse. By day, he installed a secret room in his apartment to hide the cash he was stealing. But Steve was getting sloppy.
Mutual friends who were there said he was like bragging about the cash that they had stashed in various places in the club and the 2 sets of books, and they were not discreet about keeping that secret.
Rubell wasn't just bragging to friends.
Steve was very high on lewds one night, and they were taping him for something, and he said on the air in some TV show, some news program, what the IRS doesn't know won't hurt them.
For disco owners Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager, the years 1977 and 1978 were one long party at Studio 54. Giddy with success, the young owners rewarded themselves by skimming the till and pocketing the profits. The morning of December 14th, 1978, Rubell's lack of discretion caught up with him. Writer Anthony Hayden Guest.
They discovered money, they discovered books, they discovered everything they needed.
Former Assistant U.S. Attorney Peter Sudler.
The actual books and records that showed the evidence of the skim were found in the ceiling of the basement. And if you remove the ceiling tiles, these books just kind of came out.
Word of the raid spread fast. Richie Notar.
Big bust. I'm at home. What does that mean? It's a big bust. You know, I can't talk, and you know, so I get dressed up. I go down to because it was payday, and I remember walking in, and it was all these guys, young guys, you know, wet behind the ears, as they say, IRS agents, FBI. And as soon as we walked in, what are you doing here? You got to sit here. And they were totally controlling.
During the search, Rubell and Schrager entered the premises, Schrager carrying a load of books, accounting journals, put them down on the premises, walked away from them, and when one of the IRS agents went over to examine them, he found an envelope of white powder. DEA came down and they field tested the substance, and it was, in fact, tested positive for cocaine, at which point I authorized Mr. Schrager to be arrested for possession of cocaine.
The feds discovered a pile of cash, along with details of the skimming, in a safety deposit box in a Manhattan bank. What started as an investigation into simple tax evasion was snowballing into multiple felonies.
After all these guys left and they collected whatever they had to, we had a meeting with us. They said, you know, people will approach you on the street, and if they do, you tell them, speak to my lawyer, Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn, the former counsel to House Un-American Committee Chairman Joseph McCarthy, was a formidable opponent.
Roy Cohn came back into the club after Ian Schrager's arraignment, and he started turning over desks and chairs and creating a mess, and then he would have the media come in, the press, and say, look what they've done to the club, when we'd been very careful not to upset anything.
Columnist Liz Smith.
They had a lot of protection. They had Roy Cohn, the lawyer, jumping around saying they hadn't done anything wrong, and they had all their pals saying that. But as time went on, everybody could see they were going to go down for this.
The evidence confiscated during the raid was indisputable.
There were two sets of books. There were lists of kind of all the famous people who'd been given quote-unquote party favors, you know, including what, you know, who'd been given precisely which drug and so forth. And so, I mean, they really painted themselves into a corner and then put up a little barred window.
Oh, they hadn't committed a murder or anything, but they had stolen from the government.
People in the business took the bust in stride.
When the IRS hit, nobody was surprised. How could you be surprised? I mean, there was so much money coming into that place. It's Saturday night. There had to be 4,000 or 5,000 people in the place. They all paid, what, $15, $20? And they all drank their asses off.
The raid on Studio 54 turned out to be one of the biggest busts in IRS history. But the feds didn't stop the party.
Steve pretty much came out and said, you know, the party goes on. And it was almost more of a party the next night out of, like, a show of support.
But the general public really didn't know what was going on, so it really didn't affect them.
On December 31st, 1978, just 2 weeks after the raid, Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager threw one hell of a New Year's Eve bash. An enormous crowd angrily pushed against the front door.
Steve got so frustrated that he made me stand outside with a stack of 50s giving money back to people.
Media coverage contributed to the frenzy of the night.
We had the radio on, and it would say, oh God, look who's arriving, Halston, Bianca, Andy. And like we were sitting right there at Halston's house, but they were like on the radio saying like we were arriving at Studio 54.
Good times or bad, the press always had a field day with the club. In February 1979, a portrait of Steve Rubell graced the cover of Andy Warhol's Interview magazine.
By this time, he was like Mr. New York, and everybody sincerely loved him, you know. And so Andy chose to have him on the cover.
The press wasn't all that flattering. That November, New York Magazine did a cover story about Studio and printed the list the IRS had confiscated of who had been given what illegal drugs or party favors at the club.
Seeing it in print maybe was a reality that there might be some consequences. So I think it really hurt because they saw that there might be a jail sentence.
Prosecutor Peter Sudler.
Eyewitness testimony that the then White House Chief of Staff, Hamilton Jordan, had been to Studio 54 and had been seen using cocaine.
Entrepreneur Mark Fleischman.
That was in the beginning of Reagan's campaign for the presidency, and Roy Cohn was a serious Reagan supporter at a very high level, and must have been on his mind that putting Hamilton Jordan into a very compromising position would have been a serious detriment.
A special prosecutor was assigned to investigate the allegations. He found no evidence of wrongdoing. No charges were brought against Jordan. Arthur Weinstein.
They thought that they were going to get out of it. And, you know, when they brought up that Ham Jordan nonsense, that sort of sealed the deal. I mean, that wasn't smart.
On November 2nd, 1979, 35-year-old Rubel and 33-year-old Schrager pled guilty to charges of tax evasion. In an effort to ensure a lenient sentence, Rubel and Schrager decided to cooperate with the feds and squeal on other club owners. Stephen Gaines.
His lawyer, Roy Cohn, told him to turn in anybody. So if Steve Rubel knew that you had ever done anything wrong in your life, he told the authorities. He ruined the lives of lots of people.
The result of that was that they were able to get a sentence reduction from the sentencing judge based on their cooperation. And I believe that their sentences were reduced from 3.5 years to about 2 years.
2 years was still a pretty stiff sentence for tax evasion. Lester Persky.
There was no recognition of the fact that they were new and young doing it, and that they might have made mistakes, but they were not motivated by any evil intent.
At the end of January 1980, Rubel and Schrager threw a huge farewell party for themselves.
Every night was just a big party, that compounded by 10, you know, it was just out of control. We must have got out of there like 11 the next morning or something.
It was so hard to think of this being the last night, you know, I mean, you sort of thought about it, but you know, reality never really set in for a while. Till the next day when you woke up and you found you had a few drink tickets in your pocket and no place to go to use them.
Steve was in rare form the night of the party.
The IRS is after him, and he's getting up and making a speech like he had done this noble thing. And they played Gloria Gaynor singing "I Will Survive." And then there was one of those ribbons, those ticker tape things that says things, you know, and it was the IRS has busted Studio 54. And then the man in the moon came down with the spoon and the cocaine stuff, and we all cheered like it was a terrific thing.
Myra Shear.
Steve opened the house for drinks, and he had on a Frank Sinatra type hat, and he played I Did It My Way. Like, he just had a really good attitude about it, and was willing to accept the consequences. And, you know, you just knew he'd be back.
Mark Beneke.
I remember most standing on the bridge with Andy Warhol, Liza Minnelli, Diana Ross, all these people. I think Liza and Diana were singing a song to Steve. It was quite a night.
There was an undertone of melancholy, of course, but you know, I knew that they weren't going away for an incredibly long period of time, and one also knew they weren't going to Alcatraz or something. You know, they were going to what we call a camp, you know, Club Fed.
Not quite. On February 1st, 1980, Rubel and Schrager were placed in the Metropolitan Corrections Center in downtown Manhattan. Arthur Weinstein saw Steve Rubel the night before he was locked up.
When he had his duffel bag ready to go. And he wasn't distraught. You know, once he made up his mind, hey, this is it. I'm going, I'm out of here. You know, I felt worse than he did, I thought. You know, you're seeing a friend go.
4 weeks later, on February 28, 1980, Studio 54's liquor license expired and the club closed. The post-prison achievements of Steve Rubell and Ian Schrager were being noticed by the press. On July 22, 1985, New York Magazine put the two men on the cover, hailing them as the Comeback Kids.
I think people were impressed that Steve and Ian could make such a comeback in a short time.
But all the success in the world could not give Rubell back his health.
He got progressively cranky, and he looked not well, and he would cough a lot, and he was yelling at people unnecessarily, and I knew something was wrong.
On July 23, 1989, Steve Rubell died. He was just 45.
Steve Rubell did not die of AIDS. Steve Rubell had chronic hepatitis, and eventually that's what took him down. He went into septic shock, and that's how he died.
A funeral service was held at Manhattan's Riverside Chapel.
It was family, close friends, and that was pretty much it. But the people who were at the funeral were all people who truly loved Steve.
Steve Rubell and the memories he and Ian Schrager created will not soon be forgotten.
People had a great time there. That's what people remember. A lot of people met and married and all that stuff. When people think of that era, they smile.
I learned that let yourself go, dare to have a good time, dare to stop short of the edge, don't go over the edge. That's why I guess we're still here. Go to the edge, but don't go over it.
It was like this safe house, you know, and you could just go and just be a little crazy and have fun. And you really knew you had fun because your stomach would ache the next day because you had laughed so hard. You know? And anytime that you're laughing so hard, it can't be bad.
I was happy to get out of there, vertically instead of horizontally. So I always considered that a good night when I could walk out on my own steam and still appear that I had, my faculties about me.
It was a tremendous thing to live through. I survived because I wasn't promiscuous, but I know a lot of my friends were, and they're not around anymore.
We knew it couldn't last forever. I mean, it had doomed written on it, on every piece of glitter, because nothing that fabulous can last forever.
People are being interviewed to remember things after partying at Studio 54. So, I think that's a feat in itself, a remarkable one. So everyone has to dig way down into the resin to remember.
It was a time that I'm glad to have lived in and lived through. It's like I've always said, it was the last good time had by all.
But with the help of modern technology, those good times can be recreated.
Someone said to me, you can't say that you've had a karaoke night unless you've had some irate, drunken woman get on stage and sing I Will Survive.
And the space is still available, according to Joshua Hadar, whose family owns the building.
You can rent it out for a night and really carve out your own image, whether it's a fashion show or a movie screening or, a club night or some kind of corporate event, a product launching. And that's basically what it is. I mean, the beauty of this place, of the actual original Opera House, is still intact. You can see the reliefs and all the ornate architecture. It's gorgeous.
As for the old crowd...
Yeah, I would live those years over again. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You bet I would. I'd go back in a flash.
Absolutely. I would go back in a jet-set flash. In fact, I still have all my dresses in case they call me back, I'm ready.